It often began with a sound that, honestly, just did not belong to the quiet hours of the night. Sometimes it was the crunch of tires on gravel, the heavy tread of boots on a staircase, or the sharp, insistent rap of a fist on a wooden door. For millions, this was the moment when fear really became real. It was the moment when the abstract power of the state materialized in their hallway, embodied by grim-faced men in long coats. These men didn't need to shout. Their presence was enough. They spoke in low official tones, their words carrying the weight of an unchallengeable authority. The question was never why, but who? And well, the answer was always you. Inside the small apartment, a family would freeze. A husband and wife would exchange a silent, knowing glance. The children, woken by the noise, might begin to cry, their innocent confusion just adding another layer to the terror. The men would enter without waiting for an invitation, their eyes scanning the room, taking in every detail, every photograph, every book. They were methodical, professional harbingers of doom. They weren't there to reason or to debate. They were there to execute an order born in a distant, faceless bureaucracy, an order that would now shatter this small, private world forever. The idea of a secret police force is not a modern invention. Its roots stretch back to regimes that sought to maintain power through more than just armies and laws. Rulers have always worried about plots, rebellions, and honestly, even the private thoughts of their subjects. But the modern secret police, the kind that became synonymous with 20th century totalitarianism, was a different kind of beast. It was born from revolution and ideology. When the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia in 1917, they faced enemies on all sides. To defend their fragile state, they created the Cheka. Its stated purpose was to fight counter-revolution and sabotage, but its mission quickly expanded. It became an organ of terror, unbound by law, tasked with remaking society itself. This new model of secret police was fundamentally ideological. It wasn't just about protecting a monarch or a president, it was about protecting a revolution and enforcing a new way of thinking. The Cheka, and its successors, the GPU, NKVD, and KGB, were the sword and shield of the party. They were tasked with identifying and eliminating not just active opponents, but potential ones. The power of a secret police force was built upon a foundation of information. Its primary objective was to know everything, what people said in the privacy of their homes, what they wrote in their letters, who they met, and even what they thought. To achieve this kind of omniscience, they employed a vast and varied toolkit of surveillance. In the early days, this meant human intelligence. A network of agents and informers was the cornerstone of control. But as technology advanced, so too did the methods of the secret police. Telephone lines were tapped, tiny microphones were hidden in walls and light fixtures, and mail was systematically opened, read, photographed, and resealed in special laboratories. The East German Stasi perfected this technological surveillance to an astonishing degree. They maintained a massive archive not only of written files but also of scents. They would collect odor samples from the belongings of suspected dissidents, preserving them in sealed glass jars. If a piece of dissident literature was found, trained dogs could then be used to match the scent to a specific individual. This meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail sent a clear message to the population: nothing is private. The state's gaze could penetrate the most intimate spaces of your life, and its memory was long. This constant possibility of being watched or listened to was a powerful tool for enforcing self-censorship. The most insidious and effective weapon in the arsenal of any secret police force was not the microphone or the prison cell, it was the ordinary citizen. Regimes like the Stasi or the Securitate understood that they could never place an officer on every street corner or in every apartment block. Instead, they aimed to place an informant there. They nurtured a vast, sprawling network of unofficial collaborators, inoffizielle Mitarbeiter in German, who spied on their friends, colleagues, neighbors, and even their own family members. This whisper network was the true engine of social control, turning the entire society into a potential instrument of its own oppression. Recruitment into this network was a subtle and often coercive process. It rarely began with a direct threat. Instead, a Stasi handler might approach a potential informant with an appeal to patriotism or civic duty. They would flatter them, suggesting they had special insights that could help protect the state from its enemies. If flattery failed, they would move to leverage. Perhaps the target had a black mark on their record, a past mistake that could be held over their head. Maybe they wanted a better apartment, a promotion at work, or permission for their child to attend university. The psychological toll on these informants was often immense. Some were true believers, convinced they were doing the right thing. But many were racked with guilt and fear, trapped in a double life. The story of Vera Lengsfeld, an East German dissident, perfectly illustrates this corrosion of trust. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, she accessed her Stasi file, a common practice for former citizens of the GDR. She was horrified to discover that one of the most prolific informants against her, codenamed Donald, was her own husband, Knud Wallenberger. In the vast, tragic chronicle of Stalin's Great Terror, the story of the poet Osip Mandelstam stands as a testament to the clash between individual genius and totalitarian power. Mandelstam was one of Russia's most brilliant and original poets, a man whose life was his art. He was not a political organizer or a conspirator. His crime was one of words, of perception, of daring to capture the truth of his time in verse. In November 1933, at a small private gathering in Moscow, he recited a short searing poem that would seal his fate. Known as the Stalin epigram, it was a 16-line masterpiece of insolence and breathtaking courage. The poem was never written down, only memorized by a handful of listeners. But in a city teeming with NKVD informers, a secret so dangerous could not be kept. The poem described the Kremlin mountaineer, a man with cockroach whiskers and fingers fat as worms. It spoke of the climate of terror he had created, where every conversation was about him and any execution was a treat. It was a direct, personal, and visceral attack on Joseph Stalin himself. For someone to compose such a poem was an act of rebellion. To recite it aloud was an act of suicide. Word of the epigram inevitably reached the ears of the secret police, and Mandelstam's fate was set in motion. In May 1934, the knock came at the door of his apartment. NKVD agents arrested him, and the interrogation began. The case was so sensitive that it was reported directly to Stalin. The dictator's reaction was peculiar. Instead of ordering an immediate execution, he famously said to isolate but preserve the poet. This led to a sentence of 3 years of exile in the remote town of Cherdyn, a punishment that, while harsh, was far from the worst possible outcome. It was a cat-and-mouse game, a demonstration of Stalin's absolute power to give life or to take it away. For a time, Mandelstam and his wife Nadezhda lived in a precarious state of semi-freedom, always under the watchful eye of the state. But the reprieve was temporary. In the escalating madness of the late 1930s, no one was safe. In May 1938, Mandelstam was arrested again, this time charged with counter-revolutionary activities. There was no powerful poem this time, only his name on a list. He was sentenced to 5 years in the hard labor camps of the Kolyma, a region known as the coldest pole of the Gulag. He never made it. Living in a society patrolled by a secret police force was, honestly, an exercise in constant psychological adjustment. The most pervasive feeling wasn't always acute terror, but rather this low-grade, chronic anxiety that just never seemed to go away. It was the fear of the unsaid, the unknown, and the arbitrary. People learned to live with what you might call a dual consciousness, a public self and a private self. In public, whether at work or just standing in queues, they displayed conformity. They repeated the official slogans, applauded at the right moments during political rallies, and kept their opinions to themselves. The public face was really a mask of loyalty, worn for survival. Only in the most trusted company, and even then with caution, could the mask be lowered. This kind of duality bred a deep and corrosive mistrust that fractured society. The informant network meant that anyone, a friendly colleague, a helpful neighbor, a drinking buddy, even a lover, could be a source of danger. This suspicion atomized communities, preventing the formation of the genuine social bonds that could lead to collective action or resistance. People became guarded, their conversations anodyne and superficial. The fear of being reported for an offhand remark or a cynical joke led to a pervasive self-censorship. Honestly, it was just safer to talk about the weather or sports than about politics or the economy. This silence was a victory for the regime, achieved without firing a single shot. The family, which was traditionally a sanctuary of privacy and trust, was not immune to this pressure. Children were taught in schools and youth organizations to be vigilant and to report any anti-state sentiments they might hear, even from their own parents. Even in the darkest heart of the police state, the flame of human resistance was never entirely extinguished. While open rebellion was often suicidal, courage took many forms. Some quiet and personal, others bold and public. For many, resistance was simply the act of maintaining one's own intellectual and moral integrity. It was the refusal to believe the propaganda, the secret reading of forbidden books, or the listening to foreign radio broadcasts in a muffled room. It was the telling of political jokes, a dangerous but, honestly, vital act of defiance that punctured the pomposity of the regime and created small, fleeting moments of shared dissent. These acts were a way of keeping a part of oneself free. There were also more organized forms of resistance. In East Germany, the church often provided a sanctuary for dissident groups. Under the protection of the clergy, peace activists, environmentalists, and human rights advocates could meet, discuss ideas, and plan small-scale protests. These groups, like the one that met at the Gethsemane Church in Berlin, were under constant Stasi surveillance. Their members were harassed, arrested, and intimidated. Yet they persisted, creating networks and distributing underground publications, or samizdat. These smuggled, typewritten essays and newsletters were a lifeline of uncensored information, connecting disparate groups and keeping the idea of a different society alive. Daring escapes were another powerful form of resistance. The Berlin Wall stands as the most infamous symbol of this struggle, a concrete manifestation of a state's fear of its own people. The stories of those who tried to cross it are legends of ingenuity and bravery. People tunneled beneath it, flew over it in homemade hot air balloons, and crashed through its checkpoints in armored vehicles. Each successful escape was a propaganda victory for the West and a humiliating defeat for the East German regime. It demonstrated in the most dramatic way possible that the workers' paradise was in fact a prison from which people would risk everything to flee. Perhaps the most iconic moment of resistance came in the final years of the Cold War. In Leipzig, East Germany, the weekly peace prayers at the St. Nicholas Church grew into mass demonstrations. In the autumn of 1989, tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of people marched through the city, chanting "Wir sind das Volk," "We are the people." The security forces, including the Stasi, were overwhelmed. For the first time, the sheer number of people in the streets neutralized the power of the secret police. The fear had broken. The collapse of communist regimes in Eastern Europe did not, instantly erase the legacy of the secret police. Their influence lingers like a phantom limb, a painful memory that continues to shape politics, society, and individual lives. One of the most immediate and difficult challenges was the question of justice and accountability. What was to be done with the tens of thousands of former secret police officers and the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of informants? Should they be prosecuted? Should they be banned from public life? Or should they be forgiven in the name of national reconciliation? Different countries chose different paths, none of them easy. The opening of the secret police archives was a moment of profound and often painful revelation. In Germany, the Stasi Records Agency allowed citizens to see their own files, to learn who had spied on them. This process, known as Aufarbeitung, brought devastating truths to light. Friendships were shattered, marriages collapsed, and public figures were disgraced when their past as an informant was revealed. While this transparency was crucial for understanding the past, it also reopened old wounds and sowed fresh division. The files were a stark bureaucratic record of betrayal, a testament to the way the state had systematically broken the bonds of trust that hold a society together. The psychological scars run deep. Generations who grew up under the constant threat of surveillance carry its lessons with them. A learned distrust of authority, a reluctance to engage in public life, and a deep-seated cynicism can persist long after the regime itself has fallen. In many post-communist societies, a nostalgia for the certainties of the old order, however oppressive, can emerge. People may remember the guaranteed employment and social stability, forgetting the price of that stability was fear and a lack of freedom. The physical remnants of the secret police also serve as a powerful legacy. Former headquarters like the Gestapo's main office in Berlin or the KGB building in Vilnius have been transformed into museums and memorials. These sites of conscience preserve the memory of the victims and educate new generations about the mechanics of terror. They stand as a solemn warning. The history of the 20th century's great secret police forces is not merely a collection of grim stories from a bygone era. It is, in fact, a vital and urgent lesson for the present. The core principles that allowed the Gestapo, the NKVD, and the Stasi to flourish, the concentration of unchecked power, the erosion of privacy, and the use of fear to control a population, are not confined to history. The technologies have changed, but the fundamental threats to freedom remain. Today, the surveillance tools available to a state are more powerful than anything Reinhard Heydrich or Lavrenti Beria could have ever dreamed of. In the digital age, the potential for mass surveillance has grown exponentially. The state no longer needs to place a microphone in a wall or recruit a neighbor to spy. Our digital footprints, our emails, social media posts, search histories, and location data create a comprehensive and permanent record of our lives, thoughts, and associations. In the hands of a benevolent government, this data might be used for legitimate security purposes. But in the hands of an authoritarian regime, it becomes the ultimate tool of social control, capable of identifying dissent before it even coalesces into a movement. The Stasi needed one informant for every 66 citizens. A modern state can achieve a far greater reach with algorithms and servers. We see echoes of these historical tactics in the world today. We see the use of propaganda, now amplified by social media, to create division and demonize minorities. We see the labeling of journalists and critics as enemies of the people to justify crackdowns on free speech. We see the passage of vaguely worded national security laws that give the state broad powers to monitor and detain its citizens with little oversight. These are the modern-day equivalents of the emergency decrees that gave birth to the Gestapo. They are incremental steps on a path that history has shown us leads to a dark destination. The ultimate lesson from the history of the secret police is the profound importance of vigilance. Freedom is not a permanent condition, it is a constant struggle. It requires a robust legal system that protects individual rights, an independent judiciary that can hold power to account, a free press that can expose abuses, and an active, engaged citizenry that refuses to trade liberty for the illusion of security. The stories of Osip Mandelstam, of the Leipzig protesters, and of the countless anonymous victims teach us that the price of silence and conformity is unacceptably high. We must remember their experience, not just as history, but as a warning. The knock at the door is always closer than we think.